Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
Pinpointing with the Philadelphia experiment and the frost has more to do with creating a rip in time space. This ancient man, and when I say ancient, I mean starting in ancient times on up until relatively recently, was highly productive. They knew things that we don't know that we knew. All I can say is this civilization is all around us, and it's been covered up in a lot of cases by calling it natural. Because of the way my research unfolded, I really think that the Philadelphia experiment had something to do with some part of this. It's just the way things unfolded. This line runs through, and it's the exact center of what's called a star tetrahedron in sacred geometry, which is the same shape as the Star of David. I believe that the Denver airport sits at the exact center of this star tetrahedron, which would make sense given what's supposed to be there. This is Michelle Gibson, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio.
So are there specific things in Oklahoma City that I missed when I was there?
It's everywhere, Richard.
Okay.
it's everywhere. It's going around the block. And when I first started to wake up to what I was, to the possibility that there was a civilization all around me, I lived near Integris Baptist Hospital, if you know where that is.
Yep.
I want to say it was called Mayfair area. My apartments were at the corner of Independence and 50th.
Okay.
And there's earthworks. I mean, I could walk between where I lived and the hospital, and there was earthworks everywhere. But until you tune into it, you don't even realize it. I mean, the geometric shapes, you can go drive along anywhere in OKC and you see, perfectly shaped where buildings were. They were sitting on top of these earthworks. And
what are earthworks?
It's just a matter of shifting perception. One way you can call them mounds, but they're artificially made. And I think they were made specifically for a reason with regards to the Earth's energy grid, and they had piezoelectric qualities and things like that, where they serve some kind of function, which I think everything did. Location, buildings, their orientation, their antiquitech on the top, so they had what we might think were lightning rods or something like that. They were actually serving either a transmission or a generation function, receiving function, once upon a time.
And some might say that some of the golf courses that we see might also be repurposed mounds of some sort. Yeah. At least in that, like you said, once you see something, it's like you can't unsee it. And then we live here in Denver, and so we've been digging into some of the stuff here, and there's a Denver East High School, which is one of the most amazing high schools I've ever seen in the entire world. It has a clock tower, it has a dome, and then right next to that is a park called City Park. And then on the west side of City Park, there is a Catholic church called St. Ignatius, which also appears to have some antiquitech on it. And then on the right next to, butting up against City Park, is a public golf course.
Yeah, they're all clues. And once you start to know what to look for, it's amazing what comes up. On where Lake Hefner is in Oklahoma City.
Yep.
There's golf courses on one side of it. Okay. I was driving around with my friends because I started to figure out that those artificial lakes that Oklahoma is filled with, and they're all artificial lakes. They're all artificial lakes. There's a few natural lakes that are like places where the rain catches, or there's some kind of natural thing. There's a name for it, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but the major lakes in Oklahoma are all man-made. And I started to figure out that they covered up ancient infrastructure. And I went to Lake Thunderbird outside of Norman to test that. And I took pictures, and I can show you the pictures of ancient stonework covered up with water. Well, at Lake Hefner, if you go to the shore of the lake, it's covered with concrete slabs.
Yeah.
So you don't know what's there. But if you go to Martin Nature Park, which is off of Memorial Drive to the north of Lake Hefner, you can walk around the park and you can see evidence for it. The walkway is lined with megalithic stones, and again, if you know what to look for, it's definitely there.
Yeah.
So, and that's right next to Lake Hefner. So I think in the city, and I think they probably did the same thing at Lake Oberholzer, which is also in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
They covered it up, but if you go outside of the city, you can find it in the lakes around there.
Our historical version of Oklahoma City and how it was founded, and the land run, and some of that stuff in itself, kind of lends itself to some questions and wondering as to what was going on and how the city was built, and those sorts of things as well. There's a book called Boomtown, and it discusses the kind of the parallels between the founding of Oklahoma City, along with the purchase and bringing the Seattle Supersonics to Oklahoma City to become the Oklahoma City Thunder. So it tells a historical path of Oklahoma and how it became a city, and some of the people that were involved in the development of the city. But then there's chapters mixed in about the basketball team coming to the town and how that all developed as well too. So it's a pretty interesting book. And I was a history teacher for almost 11, special education, but with a specialty in teaching the special education students history. So I've always considered myself to be a little bit of a history buff, and I've always kind of enjoyed architecture. And I've been to Europe, I've been to South America, and obviously the pyramids, we all know the story behind that. So I've always, all of the architecture has always kind of made me scratch my head and question the narrative of how these structures were built, yet with our technology and our advancements that we have, and supposedly we're the most advanced civilization of all time, that we today would find it almost still difficult, if not impossible, to recreate these structures. And so that's what somehow led me to the topic of the mud flood and tartaria. Actually, someone recommended John Levi's videos and works on YouTube. So that's what led me. And then I discovered you and your works and your videos and some of the podcasts that you've been on. And so we are super stoked to get you on to talk. And, if there's anything specific that you want to touch on in terms of, tartaria or the mud flood, I know we have some questions lined up, but we'd also be more than happy to kind of wind you up and let you go and be mesmerized by what you can tell us. And, some of the things that with the grid lines and stuff, I know you talk about the Star of David grid line that, kind of intersects and runs through the United States, but then also there's a grid line that runs through Denver, which is where we are. So that kind of interests us as well too.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, according to what I was able to plot out, and I'll show you this in just a moment, what I believe that the Denver airport sits at the exact center of this star tetrahedron, which would make sense given what's supposed to be there underground. But I know that Denver airport's a drive from Denver.
Yes.
And if what I plotted out on the map that I first discovered this on, it's a distance from Denver, but this line runs through, and it's the exact center of what's called a star tetrahedron in sacred geometry, which is the same shape as the Star of David. And I'll and this map was the original map that I found it on, and it's quite tattered. If I open it, it's going to fall apart. but this was really the beginning of my journey of my own original research. Even though I had, as soon as it was available on the internet, I watched all of the alternative stuff that I could find because I was interested in unexplainable historical mysteries, starting with megaliths in Peru, and in Turkey, you find the same thing that you find in South America, and how they do it and who did it. And so that was kind of my background. This is actually a lifelong curiosity. And like yourself, I loved history growing up. The more ancient, the better, but there was so little information available at that time. And I was born in 63. But I still wanted to know. I was interested in Renaissance history, especially. And what that did, that interest in history, even though I'm glad I didn't major in it, which I considered, but I don't think I would have been open to this had I gotten a college level education in it. It informed me about what we're told was going on at certain periods in history. So I had a really good background in what we're taught, and the books that I like to read, historical fiction like Michener, and the guy that wrote The Agony and the Ecstasy, was that Michener or somebody else? Irving Stone. His books I like to read. Always had an interest in travel, and I've traveled a lot. I've been to Europe. When I was in the army, I was stationed in Augsburg, Germany, and so I had a background in it, and then I had the experience of living in a lot of different places, which was a big help because I have memories of being there and things that I saw and things that I experienced and things I had questions about, even though I didn't know what it was going to lead to. And I was never really plugged into the system, in the sense that I've lived a different kind of life. I've never done what people expected me to do. I don't care about the things most people care about, like shopping bores me to death.
Yep.
I do not enjoy shopping. My mom's like, come move near me and we'll go to the mall. And I'm like, I don't care. It's not a draw for me. I've lived in places that don't have shopping malls.
Yeah.
I lived in Fairbanks, Alaska for 11 years altogether, and there's shopping there. But if you really love to shop, Fairbanks is not the place to live. But if you like to do other things, it's pretty cool and cold.
Yeah.
But I loved it.
I think one of the big points you just made is you're not into things that other people are into, which led you into getting into alternative history and alternative narratives. And the one thing I wanted to ask you today is to try to kind of explain the timeline for me of when we kind of went from this utopia to this timeline we're on now, and kind of how I comprehend it from your work is there was a Back to the Future experiment gone bad, maybe, that caused a great frost in probably, I think it was like the 16 somethings in Ireland. And then you had in 1850s them uncovering these lost lands and stuff. So if you can kind of just clear up that timeline and how you think of that.
Okay. I'll go at that from a couple of different directions. Following the grid lines that I ultimately had to go to a globe, and flat Earth globe is another issue, but I needed it to get to the other side. And I had already learned about sacred geometry, and using this flat map to extend the lines could only get me so far. So once I switched to a globe, I was able to follow it not only around the Earth, but I was able to find places lined up in circles and things like that. So I think that the grid lines work both ways. That's my personal opinion. And I've talked to other people that think that as well. So I don't think that the system that I've worked from is dependent on whether the Earth is flat or round or a sphere. What I do know is I got real information back. and I was looking at places I had absolutely no reason to look at had they not showed up in my spreadsheets. So what I did was I superimposed a star tetrahedron that I found by connecting cities in North America. And so Edmonton is at the top here, Merida, Mexico is at the bottom. And in a star tetrahedron in sacred geometry, this would be like the center line, the prana tube. We've got a prana tube going through us with our Merkaba. And Denver, excuse me, Denver is right there. So when I say that this exact center of this is like just offset from Denver, which is why I think it's the airport. And then Houston is also on this line. So you've got the Johnson Space Center here as well. And in Oklahoma, there's also the Oklahoma Spaceport. And that's, I think, on the line as well in Ouachita County. So I did my research following these places that I would never have looked at, and I got a ton of information in return. So I basically eyeballed the places that were in alignment, and then I followed up by looking online at pictures and drone videos and things like that. So I'm collecting all this information several years before I started to blog, which is when I started to develop my research and really go into depth. And it's taken me places I would never have imagined. So getting back to your question about the timeline, what I think is that there was an uninterrupted long period of time when humanity was at a very high level of consciousness and developing on a positive timeline, that human beings were much larger. They knew who they were. They knew why they were here. There wasn't any question about that. And they were creating, they were co-creating the best of what we see around us. So I think that includes waterways, which would be canals. I think rivers are in the same category. I think they were man-made. If you look at major rivers, they have masonry banks going like the River Thames and the River Clyde in Scotland, and you know they're canals. But part of the cover up is to make us believe that all of this is natural, including mountain ranges and all that other kind of thing. And there's a lot of, I mean, even the Rocky Mountains, I think, are an example of this. And somebody I know from Denver told me to look into Long's Peak, and that's interesting as well. There was some interesting finds there. So again, I think we've been deceived in terms of our environment, and that this ancient man, and when I say ancient, I mean starting in ancient times on up until relatively recently, was highly productive. They knew things that we don't know that we knew, you know, how to lift gigantic stones and how to align things perfectly with what's going on in this heavens, like equinoxes and full moons and all that, because you see solar and lunar alignments with all kinds of architecture up to the present day. So there's a lunar alignment with the Empire State Building, with state capitol buildings, with seeing them with mosques. Everything was lining up perfectly. So I think there was a true harmony between heaven and earth, and that humanity was creating this. And I don't think of ancient aliens, I think of ancient humans. They probably had a relationship with ancient aliens that we don't have anymore because of what's taken place here. And I think negative beings saw an opportunity to hijack the timeline and created a cataclysm. And that's what you're talking about. Because of the way my research unfolded, I really think that the Philadelphia experiment had something to do with some part of this. It's just the way things unfolded in my work. And then some information I received from some external sources. confirmations. Some people don't like the idea of information being channeled or anything like that. And my take on that is, this information's been removed completely from the historical record and from our memory. It's got to come from somewhere. And I live in Sedona. I have friends that are kind of psychic. I don't consider myself that. I'm intuitive, but I don't get information that way. So when I get information from somebody that comes to visit, and that's what happened in this case, friend of mine knocks on my door. I know she's very psychic. She's like, "Oh, your guides are over there by your chair. They want me to tell you something." And so she said, the first thing she said was, "What you were mulling is correct." And that was the idea of a 3D time loop between 1492 and 1942. And 1942 was the year of the Philadelphia experiment. 1492 was the year of the fall of Granada in Spain and Christopher Columbus's first voyage. And 1717 is the midpoint of that. So there's 225 years on either side. Once I started looking into what happened starting from 1717 onward, there was just a lot of really weird stuff going on. Numerological stuff, dates, 1717 was the premiere of Handel's Handel's water music. And he was performing for King George the First on the Thames. And then, so that was 1717. 1917 was the year that the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha changed their name to the House of Windsor. So it was a German royal family line that changed their name on July 17th, 1917. But there's these number things that are going on in the historical record. But my friend, the psychic friend, said, "What you're mulling is correct. They want me to tell you that." And then the other thing she said, "They're showing me Ireland in 1743, and it's all bright and sunny. And before that, it's frozen." Again, I wouldn't have looked. I wouldn't even have known about this event had she not said something. So I looked it up, and the only two pieces of information I found around that time in Ireland was Handel's Messiah premiering in Dublin in 1742, and this Great Frost of Ireland that took place between 1740 and 1741 for 21 months. It's in the historical record. I don't know if I can find the book, but I ordered a book written by somebody, a historian. Apparently it's ungodly expensive now, but I think I paid like $40 or $50 for it. Great Frost of Ireland, talking about it. And it wasn't too long after that I learned about the mud flood. And somebody connected me with somebody else on YouTube, Baltimore Fats. And he was just starting his YouTube channel, and he was looking at mud flood evidence in Baltimore. And when I saw his early videos, I'm thinking, we're all looking at the same thing. And that was when I brought the mud flood into the work that I was doing. And it's still there. I mean, I've seen more evidence for it. And how else do you wipe out a worldwide advanced civilization of giants? I mean, they're not going to roll over if, a bunch of puny conquerors come in and say, we're your leaders now. They had to knock them out of the picture. And so my first thought was that this event had something to do with the mud flood. There's a lot of mud flood researchers out there, a lot of really good ones. Where I'm landing with that is I think maybe the event that I'm pinpointing with the Philadelphia experiment and the frost has more to do with creating a rip in time space. So the Philadelphia experiment said to have happened in July of 1942. And then the Great Frost of Ireland was between 1740 and 1741. In 1744, Mayor Amschel Rothschild showed up, and he was the progenitor of the Rothschild family. Within another 4 years, Adam Weishaupt showed up in Germany. So 1744, 1748, and what, if you know who Weishaupt is, if you follow alternative information, he was the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, who's also a Jesuit and a Freemason, or he was raised by Jesuits. 1750 was the year that Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld was born, and he's the progenitor of the Windsors. So his line is what seeded the new royal families of Europe. All of them. They found a way to take the old ones out and they replaced them with this one line from Germany. And I've done an extensive piece about that, looking down through the generations on up to the present day. So Queen Victoria and Prince Albert provided most of those. Their kids got married, their grandchildren, they all became kings, queens, princes, dukes, you name it. But there was an original royalty that they supplanted or replaced with this new line. And I think that this event that I'm talking about, time-space event, is actually what allowed these beings to incarnate, because I don't see them as human. I don't think they have human souls. And I think they're parasitic. And that there were these families that could have been related to the 13 bloodlines and their friends, close relations. They were the families that started to rebuild and take over everything. So you've got the Rockefellers, you've got the DuPonts, you've got these names showing up early on, the Astors. Remington was another one, the owner of Remington. That wasn't the name of the family that ended up being in control of it. I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but anyway, these associated families started coming in and basically rebuilding everything. So somewhere in there, I think there was a mud flood too, which may or may not have been caused by the same thing that I'm talking about. People talk about directed energy weapons, frequency weapons, mining. I personally don't think it was a random space weather event, because I don't think there's any way they could have rebuilt everything the way they did if it had been, a random event. What people call the Carrington event, and I haven't researched this, it was all during around that same time. That could have been part of it. The New Madrid earthquake had some weirdness if you look at the history of it. And that would have been around 1815, I think. Anyway, there are things that are kind of there that could have been a part of it. And then the history was built around that, is what I'm seeing and what I believe, because I don't think what we're told is matching up with what's actually there.
Yeah, and I think if there's one thing we've learned in the last year and a half, there is definitely some lies that have been told, and you can almost see right before your eyes, if you're tuned into it, that there is some sort of rewriting of history going on with these tearing down of these historical statues, whether you think that they are good or bad, or it represents these people in a positive light, even though they may have done bad things. And then we even get into the psyop of the Civil War, and if that was even a real thing, and that really triggers a lot of people. And it's almost like these things are designed so that if you do question them, you're almost demonized for questioning, because how could you question this horrible event, or what, this certain population of the people had to go through? How dare you question that? So it's almost like it's constructed that way, so that when you do become awake to it, if you do bring up these questions to people, you're either demonized as just a straight crazy person, or you're demonized for questioning the narrative of these historical facts. So it's quite interesting. And with the mud flood stuff that I look at, and that's kind of tuned me in, is you see all these amazing pieces of architecture, and I often wonder, why are there still dirt roads?
Mhm.
If they have the ability to build these amazing pieces of architecture in these buildings, why are there dirt roads? And another thing that makes me scratch my head is, I go to a post office or multiple post office on a fairly regular basis, but when you look at some of the things in the late 1800s, early 1900s that are classified as post offices, you wonder how much were stamps back then, because the post offices that I go to don't look anything like these amazing structures. And then why were there so many insane asylums? And why did they look like this?
Right.
You know,
Insane asylums, orphanages. Yeah, I mean, they're all really legitimate questions. And because we're not told any differently, we accept it. The big question is, why would they lie to us? Why would they lie to us about everything? Why would they lie to us about our history? And, I think the stakes are pretty high. I mean, they want control over us and creation, and the only way they could do it was to set up this false construct, educate us in it, and then perpetuate it by telling us what they wanted us to believe. And so if you start waking up and you start questioning that, then you're the only one that that's doing that. It's very lonely. And it's but if you have eyes to see and you have critical thinking abilities, which they tried to scrub that. My understanding is that critical thinking was in classical education up until around 1850, 1851, which I think was the beginning of the reset, the official beginning. And just teach people enough to memorize and become productive citizens, so they can work and pay taxes and whatnot. And that's all they really wanted. It was reliable, unquestioning people, but they still needed us to build this. They need human creativity. So they need us, but at the same time, they don't like us very much. And we're not, human life doesn't really mean very much to them. And so you have the wars with agendas that we don't know about. You have diseases and vaccines with agendas that we don't know anything about. It's all kept from us, and you're crazy if you question it.
How do you maintain sanity knowing all this and knowing all the human technology that we have inside of us and the power we have inside of us? How do you deal in the world we live in?
Well, I guess blogging and making videos is one way, and trying to get the information out in every way I can. Speaking's not my first love, but I realized when I got the information that I needed to get it out however I could. So I'm more comfortable with it than I was when I first started. And, seeing the good. I mean, I truly believe they're not going to get away with it, and that things aren't as they appear on the surface right now. And that I think there's things going on behind the scenes to help us. And I think people that are awake are helping as well. And I think, we need to be involved in this. There's not going to be a swoop down rescue, but there are forces here to help us, and us help ourselves. So it's not just being rescued, it's being awakened, and it's taking this to another level of consciousness. Because if we stay in fear or we stay in anger, it's the same level of consciousness that's created this to begin with. So now we're faced with the challenge of finding a place of at least acceptance, so we can heal ourselves, our planet, and move on in our evolution. that's, those are our choices. Either we're going to be, raised in elevation in our consciousness, or we're going to not have a very good ending. And I don't think the second option is a very good one, because it doesn't just affect here, it affects everywhere. So I don't think I could live with myself if I knew all of this and didn't do anything with it. And I've been doing it for 3 years, and I felt that when I started. So I feel like for me, it's a responsibility to keep doing it.
Well, we appreciate your work and you putting the message out there, because it's helped guys like us get awake and waking us up to other things. So appreciate your work. One thing I wanted to go back to was, when we think of the mud flood, we think of Tartaria getting swept away, but I've heard you talk about the Moors a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of talk about those two communities and how they coexisted, and who was the one creating everything, or were they doing it together, and how they kind of align with the mud flood history?
Sure. I think they were doing it together because I think Tartaria was part of the original civilization, which goes back to ancient Mu. And that's where you get Moor from, Muor, M-U'-U-R. And the ancient ones who are alive to this day call themselves Washita Moors, M-U'-U-R-S. So Mu or Moor, Moorish, goes back to very, very ancient times. And and Moors are still with us. So in Asia, you had Tartaria. And I think the reason Tartaria is so well known is because that's where we started hearing about this first. So Russian researchers, all part of the same civilization, all integrated, using the same building templates that you find in the West. And I've got examples scattered throughout all the work that I've done in England. I found a castle called Leeds Castle that's built on an artificial island. And in Japan, I found in Nagano, Japan, I want to say it's called Matsumoro Castle or something like that. It's on an artificial island. The bases of the two castles look the same. They're like star bases. What's different is the actual architecture. So Leeds Castle in England looks like an English castle, and Matsumoro Castle in Nagano looks like a Japanese or Oriental structure. But the layout on the artificial island and the base is the same in both places. So it's almost like it was a different expression of the same knowledge of building. Barbaria was Northern Africa. Might have been more than that. Again, we've so much information's been left out. It's pieced together what I know, but I do know that Barbaria historically was the Northern Africa, and to this day, the coast is called the Barbary Coast. So Morocco and Tunisia and Egypt, that coastline is the Barbary Coast. And then in India, you had the Mughal Empire. In what we call Iran today, we had Persia. In North America, there was the Washita Empire, which has been removed from history, and all the different empires around the world. But I don't think they were fighting each other like we've been taught. I think they were integrated, unified, and that there was a worldwide free energy producing grid system with the buildings, with the railroads and the streetcars and the subways and the amusement parks. And again, when you start doing deep dives into historical places like trolley parks, for example, there used to be trolley parks across North America, and trolley parks were typically found at an end of a terminal. So it was like the end of a streetcar terminal. I think there was a trolley park in Denver, and you can look it up. It may still exist, but it started out as a trolley park. and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but I've written about it. And so these were all over the place. They were said to have, started popping up around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And by the 1920s, 1930s, they were burned, destroyed, leveled for something else. And all of the streetcars all over the world started to disappear, and they were replaced by cars and buses. Somebody didn't want these things around and went through a tremendous amount of effort to remove them. So you still have some trolley cars that are functioning at different places, but they used to be everywhere. And so that's been coming up in my research more and more, because when you look for it, you find it. And I mean, you can look at the history of pretty much anywhere and you'll find trolley cars, no matter how small. So that was one aspect of it. So I think this Moorish civilization went up through Atlantis. It's what we know as Atlantis. Now, there still may have been an event that caused a continent in the Atlantic Ocean to sink. I'm just saying that I think that this civilization was the same as Atlantis, and that it existed up until relatively recently, because we're still using their buildings, like the school that you mentioned. They look like, the older schools look like castles.
Yeah.
They look like castles. They look the same everywhere. And the same thing with colleges. I haven't seen the universities around where you live, but I have seen the ones in Oklahoma. And University of Oklahoma, the School of Law in Oklahoma City, University of Oklahoma is in Norman. There was in Shawnee, there's St. Gregory's. They all had the same same style, same turrets, and the same thing with high schools that I saw around Oklahoma City. And then so I start looking for that in other places, and I find them. A lot of those have been torn down and replaced with buildings that aren't as well built. But those buildings are still in use, the ones that are still standing. A lot of them are. So I think whatever took place recently. I think they did some kind of manipulation of time and time travel, and they did something. And there's technologies that exist, again, that have been kept from us. And if you've followed anything about the secret space program, I'm just throwing that out there if you've heard of it. I mean, there's so much that's being kept from us, so many technologies, so many alternative healing technologies. You don't need big pharma. You don't need chemotherapy. They're keeping these technologies from us. And I hope that when this all turns around, and I think it will, we're going to get those technologies that have been hidden from us for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah, Jimmy and I are both lifelong athletes, and in this journey of optimization, we've also along that way gotten a lot more woo-woo in our older age, and have tapped into, consciousness and journeyed into the jungles of different countries to do different things and be with shaman and stuff. And then in having this podcast, we've also talked to some people who, they talk about humanology, and we have these different technologies within us. And, you do talk about the Vedas and chakras and all of these things, that we have the abilities to do these things. And when you look at some of these churches, or, churches, air quotes, that they have potentially have repurposed as churches, you hear a lot about sound healing, and then there's different sound vibrations that I've heard of that kill cancers and do these different things. It's limitless in terms of what we are capable of. And, the biggest thing, the big awakening for me, when, because I pushed away the concept or the thought of even talking to people when they mention flat earth. But the thing that David Weiss really opened my eyes about when we talked to him or when I listened to him was that they want us to think that we're insignificant and that, there is no purpose to all this. And, there's things like Landmark and these different organizations that are supposed to be self-help, but they're kind of teaching you that there is no purpose to this. And that's kind of what piques me and draws me into this and has me keep going deeper and deeper to look at things, is that there is a purpose. And I want to know what that purpose is. And I think we are special and we do have these technologies and these powers, and there's things to meditation and different things, breath work, that raise your consciousness level, raise your vibrations. And when you tune into the universe, you pick up on different messages and different things that if you're not aware of or awake to, you just take it as coincidence. But when you're awake to it, you kind of can tie these things together and pick up on different messages and different synchronicities, if you will. So I'm just fascinated by all of it, and it continues to make me want to dig deeper and do more research. If people are listening to this and they want to go to your website, do you have a starting point? Because I think some of our listeners that we are friends with are very open to the things that some other people think that we're absolutely crazy for mentioning things or bringing these things up. But is there like a primer? Is there places you would direct people to start? Does it start with sacred geometry? Because I don't think when people think of geometry, they think of 10th grade math class, and they have no connection or understanding of what sacred geometry really is.
Yeah, I learned about it from John Below Melchizedek, and he had a couple of books out. One was The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, volumes 1 and 2. And I actually think it was in volume 2 was the first time I ever heard of the Philadelphia experiment. And he talked about people that were involved in that and having their Merkabas were all off. There was just something wrong with them. And he's still alive. He hasn't been public for a couple of years, but for many years he was like a primary teacher about sacred geometry and hidden history. I mean, like, he was the only guy that I know of that was talking about it openly for a number of years. So I'm sure there are other teachers as well, but he's the one that I encountered. And sacred geometry is the creation pattern of the universe. And so our bodies are filled with sacred geometry. And the flower of life is the basic pattern. It's our cells, when it starts to divide, are dividing along the lines of the flower of life and the sacred geometry in it. If you've heard of the phi ratio, all of our joints are based on, one's longer than the other. No matter how you look at it, it's phi. And fractals and ratios, and as above, so below, and go from macro to micro, and you go large and you go small. But it's like a mirror. So if you look at anything about fractals, Mandelbrot set, if you look online on YouTube and you see a graphic of the Mandelbrot set, it's kind of going in on itself, and it's the same shape that keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. Or the idea of a stalk of broccoli and all the little crowns look like the stalk. That's how we are with the Creator. We're a fractal of the one source, which is why we're so special. We're more powerful than we can even imagine. And that's what they don't want us to wake up to. And that's why we're such a big prize. That that knowledge has been kept from us, whereas at one time it wasn't, and we knew that. So it's a big deal. It's like we're in the middle of a war against good and evil.
Yeah.
Biblical. And God wins. That's what we want.
Yeah.
We don't want to put it any other way. We want God to win. Because the opposite's not even, I can't even think about that.
Right.
we're a fractal of a holographic universe. And so everything is connected, like through a torus, the shape of a torus. If you're familiar with that, it's a donut shape, a part of sacred geometry. And then when I talk about the prana tube, we have our energy bodies, and we have this constant cycling going on with this energy. I think when we breathe it up, and then we can breathe it out, and that's our energy, part of our energy field in our torus. And so we've got this shape around us, and it's the same shape that's around the earth. It's the same thing that's around the universe, and we're all connected with that. So we may have physical bodies, but energetically, we're the same thing. And that's my understanding. I studied that stuff before I studied what I'm putting out there. So that came before. Sacred geometry and that information came before what I'm doing now. And that Oklahoma City was a big help in that, actually.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, when I moved to Oklahoma City, and the whole time I was there, and I tell people where I was originally from, everyone would be like, "Why are you here?" And I tell everyone that now that I'm not there, is that it is a unique place, and it is a diamond in the rough, and it is a very enjoyable city, and some of the nicest people I've ever encountered are Oklahomans. So I could definitely move back there, and would, now knowing what I know and having talked to you, I would love to go back and do some more exploring and check out the mounds. And I know you mentioned that there's some stuff on the border of Arkansas and Oklahoma, that there are some more not serpent mounds, but mounds there as well.
Yeah, that's the location of Spiral Mounds, and it's just west of Fort Smith, Arkansas. All kinds of interesting stuff through there. You know, again, once you start seeing things differently, can't be bored anymore. You know, I lived in Clovis, New Mexico for 5 years after I first got married back in the 90s, and I thought it was the most boring place I'd ever lived. You know, we were hard put to find things that we enjoyed. We went yard sailing a lot, or, you know, went on long drives and went to look at the prairie dog village at the Air Force Base next to where we lived, and had a hard time finding things to go look at. But I think, you know, had I been awake to this, you know, 30 years ago, I would have been, oh boy, you know, there's so much here, I don't know what to do. And so I think that's true about anywhere, is once you start tuning into this. And I think from the time I really started waking up to it in around 2014, it was like my primary activity, and I would go look for these places, and I would find them. There's Red Rock Canyon in Hinton, Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City. You know, again, with the right eyes, you can see built structure there. And it's like the Red Rock area there in Colorado, Garden of the Gods. You know, I mean, we're not taught that they could be anything other than natural, but if you go there and you look at it, again, you're going to see things.
So what are your thoughts on Sedona with the vortex there and the different color rocks? Do you think that is natural, or do you think that has some human intervention?
I think it's ancient architecture, infrastructure, ancient. And I think the red rocks are very ancient. And anything that we really think of as natural, canyons and things like that, I think bluffs are another one, mesas, I think that's very ancient. And then, you know, as you move up in time, you get the cathedrals and you get other buildings, other types of buildings. I think they're newer versions, but they're all doing the same thing. So you get a lot of alignments, like I was saying earlier, with the sun and the moon and each other. They were all lining up. Those older things were lining up, and the newer buildings were lining up as well. And that's what my research has been leading me to, because I've been studying this for about 3 years pretty intensively with my research, and that's what I'm finding. You know, things are, modern buildings are lined up, and a random explanation just doesn't fit.
Do you have any idea what they were doing with these mountains, or rock structures? Like, what was the purpose of them building these back in the day?
You know, I think it had a sacred purpose that's been lost to us, and it could be something in our relationship with our world and the universe and this constellations. And, I think there was a connecting factor that they were using. And I don't think things were separated. So when we go to school, there's different kinds of science, there's biology and chemistry and different kinds of math. And, I think at one time, all this knowledge was much, much more like one package and not separated out like that, like compartmentalized. And, again, I think we've lost that understanding of how things work together. And I do think that was deliberately done so we wouldn't know. So I think they were serving some kind of function, whatever that function was.
Do you believe, or have you found in your research, because I've heard different people say that there may have been, or in their thoughts or their research, that there may have been, multiple resets. Some say, I think I've heard as many as 6 or 7 resets. Do you believe in that sort of thing too? Or can all of that possibly be tied to something like the Philadelphia experiment?
It's possible. I've come to the conclusion that I have is that there was a long, extended civilization, just because everything is just so integrated and perfect all over the earth, before it got destroyed. And there could have been a series of events that caused that actual destruction. So I don't have a definite opinion about how that actually played out. I just know something happened, and I do believe it was deliberate. Beyond that, on the timing, and that kind of thing, I think we've been so messed with that, we're at the bottom of a hole looking up, just trying to figure all of this stuff out. But I do think that there could have been a series of separate events that caused this devastation. What I am not as clear on or as sold on is the idea that this was happening periodically over a long period of time. There may have been some aspects to that, but this civilization is amazing. And what they tell us about how things came into existence does not match the quality of what we live and work around that's still standing.
Is there a possibility that there is a hall of records, like a Library of Alexandria somewhere, where they made copies and they put them in a somewhere
Sure.
with one of these families?
I mean, even if you look at, like, there's supposed to have been one under this pause of the Sphinx in Egypt. Mount Rushmore is supposed to have a hall of records, if you've heard that before. Definitely. And again, because of the hatchet job done on our history, all of those locations, who knows where there were. One of the things that south of Oklahoma City is Antelope and Buffalo Springs and Sulphur. It's not too far from Turner Falls in Davis, Oklahoma. I was reading the Emerald Tablets, translation by, I want to say his name was Doriel or something like that. A friend of mine had loaned it to me to look at. And so I'm reading through it. And what really caught my eye is that there was supposed to be an interdimensional portal to the pyramids of Giza at Antelope and Buffalo Springs in Sulphur, Oklahoma. And there's a park there. And that really got my attention, so much so that I went there several times. And I'm just using that as an example. An interdimensional portal to Giza in Oklahoma? That's not in our history whatsoever. So things like that. But again, they're not in your conventional sources of information. I don't know of any conventional book you can go to and try to find out about any of this stuff.
Do you have any thoughts on Mount Rushmore? Sorry, Jim.
It probably not really, but where I'm going is that anything with rock, I think could have been originally built. So, and if you look at examples, like, I don't know if you've heard of Stone Mountain in Georgia. So it's a big granite shield. I have family in the area, so I grew up going there a lot. And there's a Stone Mountain in North Carolina, and I've seen stone mountains in other places, mountains that look like Stone Mountain. It's a rounded, I think they call it a granite shield, and that's where they carved a relief of Confederate officers.
Okay.
And I'm just using that as an example that I've seen the same thing in different places. And like with Mount Rushmore, same idea. I mean, I really haven't looked into it that deep. There's also Crazy Horse in South Dakota that they've been carving. All I can say is this civilization is all around us, and it's been covered up in a lot of cases by calling it natural. And when you really start, going to places and you start seeing masonry blocks at these natural sites, or straight edges or right angles, there's something suspect about that information.
Do you have any thoughts on Antarctica and forbidden lands that might exist that we don't know about? I know you're not married to the flat Earth, but that's kind of what got me when David said extraterrestrials and extra territories outside of what we know.
It wouldn't surprise me. I have heard of Nazis underneath Antarctica. I've heard fallen angels underneath Antarctica. A description in the Book of Enoch apparently matches a description of the geography of Antarctica. I think those beings are real. I think they're a big part of our problem. Fallen angels. I see Nazis as being an umbrella name for anybody that's involved with this hostile takeover of Earth. I think they're the same energy, same thing. So I don't think Nazis were just in one period of time in Germany. I think they existed long before and long after. So it would not surprise me if there's something that's being hidden from us in Antarctica. There's a lot of information out there about that if you look for it. And that's really one aspect of it. Another aspect, when I was long before I started doing my own research and when I was really looking for information, was Charles Hapgood's theory about these events happening and the Earth's, the outer crust of it spinning, and that Antarctica was Atlantis. So I've heard that idea also. So, there's a lot of different streams of information out there. It would not surprise me if there's some way more to Antarctica than what we're being told. Yeah. Because there's way more to everything else that we're not being told. So do they have a secret hideout base in a place where there's not supposed to be any way to live? Sure, it's a great cover.
Yeah.
You just blew my mind saying that Antarctica might be Atlantis. Every time I talk about Antarctica, there's something that comes up that keeps on digging me deeper into the rabbit hole. So thank you.
Yeah. Charles Hapgood, and I think it's spelled Hapgood.
It's like Earth crust displacement theory, correct?
Yeah, something like that, where the idea that, like an event happens and the Earth's crust just spins around.
Yeah. Well,
he talks about it. It's like there's a couple, a name of a couple. I mean, it's been so long since I've looked into this stuff. I can't pull it off the top of my head, but it seems like there's probably if you just Google is Antarctica Atlantis, you'll probably pull up those folks.
Well, when I first heard of that and that theory, I had this thought that if something like that happened, that at one point the pyramids of Giza were at the top and that was almost like the top of a globe. And that at one point that had been up in that, it was like the top of the pyramid was the North Pole. That was one crazy thought that I had in one of those Earth crust displacement things.
Well, what's interesting is when I really started to wake up to a lot of this other stuff, I was following the end of the Mayan calendar. And so I was reading people that were studying that. John Major Jenkins was one of them. And I came across a lot of metaphysical and esoteric information. And so it was in 2012 that I think is when I can pinpoint and say, by the end of 2012, I was awake. I was awake to the idea of unity consciousness. I was awake to these higher states of being, but I wasn't awake to how dark the dark was until what I experienced between 2012 and 2016 in terms of research and information that I came across. And then it was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
Whew. And I'm the kind of person, I really don't want this to be true.
Yeah.
I was pretty lucky. I had a pretty decent childhood and upbringing, and I've had a pretty good life. And man, I just, want everything to be all roses and happiness and
puppy dogs and ice cream.
We're all going to get along. And then you find out there's some really not very nice things that have been going on, and they affect humanity. They affect us. They affect kids. And it's a big motivator to keep doing this kind of work. I guess if not me, who? If not now, when?
Yes.
I think I'm just going to go out here and dig a hole and put my head in it. I don't want to know.
Yeah. That's what that guy sitting across from me does sometimes.
Yeah, it just got too much the last year, Michelle. It just got too much at times and so heavy that sometimes I just had to ignore a lot of what was going on and just focus on my personal practices and what I can see and what I can touch. Because sometimes going so deep drives me crazy. I'm sure that you have times where you have to walk away because you're going a little too deep into the rabbit hole.
Yeah. It's hard. And, and I, like you said earlier, I think it was you, Richard, what's going on right now, as hard as it is, it's waking people up.
Yeah.
That wouldn't normally wake up. It's like, okay, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Why are they pushing this?
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to go through it to get to it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And sometimes, and I've found this with times in my life where I really had to make a change that was hard. It was like you change when staying the same is more painful than changing. And I've had some pretty hard experiences to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
I think I didn't want to go through. I wanted everything to be fine. And I had to go through some tough times. And actually there were times I was in Oklahoma City that was part of that. I had to make some changes because the situation I was in wasn't working. And I wanted it to work, but it just got to the point where I was like, no, this isn't working.
I know exactly what you're talking about, Michelle. Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't covered with your work or anything with, say, tartaria or the Moors or anything that you would like to share with us real quick before we get into those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I really want to share is to encourage people, instead of accepting what you're told about everything, just start in your own communities, especially the older buildings and the parks and different things, and just look around and see what's there and ask questions. Not necessarily, you don't have to go up to a person and say, hey, what about this? But in your own mind, because unless somebody's ready for this, it's like not going to go down well, probably. But for your own education, just look at the dates that they said they're built, look at the style of architecture. Again, this doesn't really apply to newer buildings, but the older buildings for sure. And most communities have courthouses, libraries, schools, on the National Register of Historical Places, and they're big ones for this. And just start looking around your own communities and see what you find, because my experience has been you don't have to go very far at all to start finding things. It's really all around us.
Is there specific dates that people might want to look for that might kind of help them when they're looking at these buildings, kind of separate stuff?
I would say anytime between like 1830s, let's say 1830s, 1930s. Because I think 1850 was the official kickoff, but things really started to ramp up around 1830. And they were still going on with their, renaming and repurposing and everything. I would say up until at least the 1930s. And when you start getting later than that, maybe not. But I think that's a good time period to focus on. And could they have done it in that time period based on the history that we've been taught? And like you said earlier, how do they build these big buildings and they have mud streets or dirt streets right next to them?
Yeah.
How does that work?
And just the timelines of the construction seems very, we didn't even touch on the World's Fairs and stuff, but the amount of time that they say it took to build the architecture, it just seems next to impossible to do certain things in such a short amount of time, especially again considering that we don't have the technology to do those things in that amount of time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is, and just look and see if you can find any reference to trolleys in your town. Just Google historical trolleys in Denver, or outside of Denver in Grand Junction.
Yeah.
Just look in your community and see if there's a history that pops up on the internet when you search for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that information. I'm sure Richie and I are going to go and look even more at some buildings we've been looking at with the new information that we have. So thank you for that. The first rapid fire question I have for you is, are you a coffee drinker, Michelle?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
I like it. But right now I'm more of a tea drinker.
What kind of tea are you drinking right now?
Just a regular cheap brand from the grocery store, but I'm trying to switch over to more organic stuff. So I'm working on that. So my next batch will be organic tea bags.
Cool. Do you have a daily practice or a daily ritual, anything you do on a regular basis to level up, raise your consciousness, and show up as the strongest version of Michelle every day?
I smudge, so I use Palo Santo or sage in the morning. I just kind of go around and clear. And I do some meditation practices and try to connect with my higher self and bring my higher self in. And that's something I'm kind of making a commitment to do more of now. It hasn't always been the strongest part of my life. I have a drum that I got recently that I haven't used yet, but that's on my list. Find a drumming circle or something like that. So I have done more of that in the past, the drumming in the past. But I think just kind of trying to connect consciously with higher self, and bring higher self down in to this form as a recommended practice.
Do you have any specific meditation that you do, or you just do it in silence? Or you doing like TM or anything like that?
No TM. Some guided meditations I like. And usually kind of just a quiet time. I try to make some time just to focus.
Excellent. You're speaking our language.
What are you listening to right now? Music, audiobooks, podcasts? Are you reading anything?
So when I do listen to music, I like Ludovico Einaudi. And I like a lot of the Gatekeeper Skyrim audios on YouTube. The ones, like to play for 10 hours, and because I like something that's just going to be in the background and is not going to take over. So that's my preference for listening to music. I've had people send me some things. So I had a lady send me one of these books. This one's Kearney, Nebraska, because there's interesting things in here. And I think this whole series, and you can usually find them in Walmart, wherever you are, or Walgreens,
Yep.
Walmart. I think they're a treasure trove, because I know this one is of this reset information. So I'm going to be looking through that and pulling some things from there. But generally speaking, I think just with the time that it takes to do research, and I mean, this is taking up more and more of my time, which isn't a bad thing. My only challenge is really finding the time to get all the stuff out that I want to get out. And every piece of research does take time.
Yeah. Especially
the more in-depth ones. And when I first started, I did much shorter pieces, like 5 to 15 minutes. And they've just gotten more and more in depth over the 3 years I've been doing it. So the one I just did something on the history of the 90 to 92, looking at history with new eyes as part of a series. And I was going to do 90 to 99, and there was so much stuff in 90, 91, 92 that it's like, I'll never get this done. So I finally just stopped it in 92, but it would have taken me at least 4 more days to get to 94. And that was what I was going to do when I realized 99 was too far. But anyway, there's just a lot of information out there. And it's just a time consuming process to do the research and put it all together. Making the videos easy. It doesn't take long. It's just the research. And actually it's not hard. This is not a hard process for me. It's just time consuming.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the reset or a reset of sorts and the mud flood tartaria and some other things outside of your research and what you're working on and the stuff that we've talked about today. Do you have any other favorite conspiracy theory that you get down with? Have you ever met Bigfoot?
I haven't, but from what I understand, Sasquatch is at a higher level of consciousness. They're like an older brother to us, and they're trying to help us. I mean, if they haven't caught one, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to be caught. They're not going to be caught, so, but it's much deeper than that. I mean, they're telepathic. They can do things with their minds that would be really cool. And there's some really neat YouTube videos out about that. Look up fir and cedar on YouTube. I think that's what it is. Hang on. Just want to see if that's what it is. Fir and cedar. And there's some cool videos on that. It's all together.
Know what I'm doing tonight.
so again, it ain't what we've been told. And I like to walk. And I don't have much of a life, I guess, otherwise, but I'm happy. Have my cat. Pretty comfortable.
You're not alone. We do the same thing. We go for walks, and we don't have much of a life other than doing research and checking out, people like yourself and other people who put in extensive work to not only occupy our time, but invoke critical thinking and to spread the word. And obviously people like yourself and talking to you, our hope is that we create some sort of a ripple here where at the very least we intrigue people a little to go do some digging themselves and to look at some stuff. So we are super grateful for your time. And where would you like us to direct everyone? I know your website is super extensive with your blogs and your writings, but you also have your YouTube channel. If you want to put all that information out there, we'll put that stuff in the show notes for you too.
Sure. My website is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. And I've got over 200 blog posts on that from dating 3 years ago. And it's just grown and grown and grown in terms of material. And my YouTube channel is, if you type in Michelle Gibson and you type Moores after my name, it'll pop right up. I created the YouTube channel long before I started putting anything on it. So I just put it in my name. If I had done it intentionally, I would have made it the same name as my blog, but I think it's to be too much work to start changing things. And then I have Patreon / Piercing the Veil of Illusion. And then I'm a educator on a new platform called Unguru Your Life. And it's still about 3 weeks from being ready. But there's a lot of cool stuff on there. I'm the only one doing hidden history, but there's alternative health researchers, holistic medicine, finance repair, credit repair, different kinds of things. So that's, people can go look at it, but they can't join it for another couple of weeks.
And what was that one called? Unguru Your Life?
It's Unguru,
Unguru.
UNGURU life.com.
Cool. We'll be checking that out too. Michelle, it's been an honor and a pleasure. We really appreciate your time today. Like I said, we love your work, and I'm usually the one that brings these things to Jimmy. He's a film student right now, so he's usually in the trenches doing his schoolwork, but I'll kick in his door and be like, you have to check this out. And he just kind of rolls his eyes at me sometimes, but your stuff has definitely got him intrigued. And whenever you tie in things of where we're at, where we're living, you know, we're from New Jersey, so you have some stuff that in talks about New Jersey, and then also in Colorado and in Minturn and stuff like that, and here in Denver. So we got him hooked, and he's coming around, and he might be making a film for his senior project, talking about some of these.
The Great Deception. Stay tuned. Michelle, thank you so much. Like Rich said, your research has really spoken to me. I've tried to watch some of the other Mud Flood tartaria stuff, and it's a little too dry for me, but your voice, your cadence just keeps me in. So I appreciate your work so much. So keep it up.